Wow, what an excellent talk, Raj. I just love how you make a topic like artificial intelligence so accessible and relatable to all of us. Before we move into the Q&A session, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience?
I could do that very briefly. Yes, and thank you for the lovely introduction at the beginning and for your invitation to speak. I have to say thank you to Stephen McCauley, who recommended me to you. Just as a quick shout out. As per my talk, I've survived a car accident and a heart aneurysm at an early age, but it's not the only adversity that I've overcome. I'm a second generation immigrant. I was born in England. I have Indian ancestry, obviously. I'm a naturalized Canadian. I currently live in Munich, Germany. So there's been lots of adversity and overcoming adversity. It's endemic to my life. So some of it self-imposed, health obviously not. And I guess I think of AI as another adversity that we have to overcome and adapt to. And we seem to forget that at the center of all these advancements are human beings. And we detach ourselves from topics like AI because we think of it as Terminator or Matrix far into the future and not realizing that we're already part of that journey. And I guess the easiest and most relevant way that I could think of to relay it to your point, Markia, was to tell a little bit of my story, showcasing that advancements in technology are not always bad. And sitting and watching Walking Dead on Netflix, who knew that it would actually influence, better imaging in healthcare? So yeah, I'm glad that I got to tell that story, and I hope people take a new perspective on AI and their journey, and they're part of that story too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so glad to have you here with us. We do have a few questions prepared from our team that we'll start off with. And remember, to our audience members, if you have a question for Raj, you can click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to type in your question. Take it away, Ave.
So I think the first question we have for you, and you touch on this in your talk, but can you tell us a bit more about your background and how you became so passionate about emerging technologies like AI?
It's a bit of a roundabout story, to tell you the truth. I mean, my background is rather immense. I have over 30 years of work experience behind me. I started in like customer experience, managing restaurants, etc., and that led me to financial services, which then led me to human motivation. And the reason I saw the reason for this is that I saw real issues with employee engagement, especially in financial services. And employee engagement led me to AI because it's a future of work topic. And everything that's a future work topic I find really interesting, because it impacts how we work in our employee engagement. I now run TinyBox, which is a think tank, like you said, for the adoption and implementation of emerging technologies. But my team and I, we follow that because we think it's important that it's centered around the strategy that we use, not the technology. It's about how we implement the technology for humans. That's the big issue. And it has become, by virtue of the pandemic, a more urgent topic in terms of we've been thrust into virtual tools this last year. I think the latest stat was something like Zoom has 300 million daily meeting participants, and that's up from 10 million at the end of 2019. So workplaces are inundated with technology now, AI, virtual work, remote work. And then the question becomes, well, how do we motivate people? How can we unlock creativity? How can we ideate and innovate and inspire people when we're doing it remotely? Often in companies, we talk about strategy and engagement and customer experience, and that's all about employees. It's all about how we feel connected and purpose in organizations. My colleague Christoph Burkhardt says, don't be a robot, otherwise you might eventually get replaced by one. And that's not to create fear, it's to say, yes, automation and AI are here and they'll take over some part of our roles, but we have to remember we have a choice in, relearning, being creative, innovative. Those are things we still have, in our back pockets that AI doesn't yet quite have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for elaborating a little bit. We know that you have a lot of projects in the works, and you told us a little bit about TinyBox, but what do your companies do and how do they relate to AI or human motivation?
Yeah, I mean, the I kind of attack that topic from a business to business standpoint. And then the human motivation is clearly an individual standpoint. They intersect though all the time. So even though I have a lot of projects, that's the intersection, is human behavior within this business to business employee engagement piece. For instance, my main passion right now is think tanks, and they're run and hosted by TinyBox. Like we've done topics such as the future of retail and AI. We did that with Google. There's future of customer experience in AI, and that was with Zendesk. Recently, ironically, we did host a think tank that was about the future of events and how we're going to have hybrid and virtual events and experiential events in the future. But being able to find that underlying overlapping idea in what we're discussing and how we can apply technology and AI to that, how it can be used in the solutioning, that's exciting. On the individual side, I coach leaders to understand their own values in the future work topics. And the biggest realization for people is that technology is already here. There's no stopping that. What you need to focus on is the people and how do you motivate your people? How can we learn which technology supports your work the best? That's kind of the concrete strategy that we need to think of. And in the end, though, all of my projects are about providing platforms for people, whether it's insights, education, collaborations. That's what fuels my passion. I like to bring people together and discuss really interesting topics.
Oh, I love that so much. I agree that all sounds very fascinating and enticing. So one question that I'm really curious about, why are you specifically interested in human behavior and how does this relate to AI?
In the end, for every company, it's about leveraging your greatest resource, which is the people, right? It's empowering people, whether we're talking about technology or AI. Personally, I've been motivated by good managers and I've been very disengaged by bad managers, right? I'm sure you can all relate to that. And fear is not a motivator. I mean, I did look at all of your previous speakers, and your speaker, Anita Mogata, said it best. Fear is a product of not understanding. And your TEDx events, I just to expand on it because I loved your speakers, have covered this on so many levels. I mean, Stacey Clark, young, Black, gorgeous gay man combating oppression, racism, homophobia. Becky Curran Kekula, who is focusing on positive disability inclusion, right, on social media. Ray Sinaget-Regi, who we'll listen to it later, I love that you call him an average non-binary cancer survivor. Like, we're worried about AI and we can't even figure out basic inclusion, is my point, and the value of diversity and gender and neurodiversity and cognitive diversity. We have a long way to go. But on the flip side of that, and the positive side of technology and AI, is that all these people got to tell their story, because we now have the means to share that story of giving attention to these important topics, right? People are scared of what they don't understand. And AI is just another one of those things, to be honest. I think that, the people who develop algorithms for Netflix, they probably didn't think that they were going to impact imaging in healthcare, right? We think we are influencing AI, but without even understanding that we're doing it most of the time. We think we're just choosing a movie. It's influencing how Netflix recommends movies to us. We think we're just sharing photos on Facebook, and suddenly we've got ads and politics being influenced. We think we're ordering something on Amazon, but we're supporting companies. That's our way of supporting and showing that we support the purpose of companies, right? So I guess we really need to understand the power of our actions and our motivations. And that's where the human motivation piece comes in. We can eliminate fear. Use AI for good or evil. We have to make up our minds.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is our last question we have from our team. Remember, audience members, if you have a question for Raj, put that in the Q&A tab. So Raj, you discussed in your talk the different medical traumas that you've experienced throughout your life. What kind of enabled you or encouraged you to turn these traumatic experiences into your passion and career?
Yeah, I mean, you always have a choice, don't you? It's like, you got to take the positive out of it or you got to take the negative out of it. I have a really annoyingly intelligent and compassionate person in my life, Simone, who always says what resists persists, and always challenges me to ask, what do you need to learn from this, right? And so I guess with my surgeries, it was an insight into reality. You can die in a car accident tomorrow. So what are you going to do with your life? Now, this can be an overwhelming concept, what are you going to do with your life? And my friend and colleague Frank said to me once, hey, no one's going to remember you after 20 years after you're dead. Harsh, but true. It's not about the fame of it. It's about what can you focus on for the ripple effect of your actions, right? And that's kind of where I come from. Now, don't get me wrong. It took me a long time to get here. It took me about 10 years. There were 3 moments that really stood out, actually. First, it took me 10 years to go to therapy. So having somebody objective, external to your experience, reflect back to you is really important. And what she did was she did something that I'm a suck it up person, as you can probably tell. I'm like, yeah, walk it off, get on with it, like, and so she gave me permission to be a little bit angry and go, oh yeah, that really sucked. You know what? That wasn't fair. That really sucked. And she let me mourn that and then suck it up. So it was a really good healing process. And I think a lot of us forget that you have to kind of live in the awfulness of it and then you get over it, right? And I was upset that I didn't get to backpack across Thailand when I was 23. So I did it when I was 35. A little bit older backpacker, but that's fine. The other thing is that I finally realized not to follow the standard social narrative, BP by 35 and get married and have kids. I mean, one of the surgeries impacted my ability to have kids, so that was already off the table. And what you realize is that, what I realized was that after dealing with corporate politics and bullying and discrimination, and, I had good experiences, but I also had some really bad experiences. And the truth is that I just realized sitting at a desk unhappy is probably not the ripple effect I want to have. And if I'm happy day to day, then I'm probably going to be a little kinder. And then that person that I'm kind to, maybe will be a little kinder to the next person. Kind of, that's how it works. And then the last thing was that I took risks because I realized I survived twice. So take a few risks and quit your job if that's really how unhappy you are. And that's all we've got left to us is the choices that we make. And I love empowering networks. I love bringing people together. So I get to do what I love. I will share one story because I think this, a lot of people have these kind of crucial moments where they realize, hey, wait a second, I'm going to own my story. And this was the one for me. I was 35 and I just finished my MBA because I did all my education stuff came later because I was dealing with the surgeries and recovery. And I have scars from my surgery. So I have a beautiful one down my chest. Lovely for a woman. And a friend of mine with no ill intent took a picture at that graduation, but removed my scar by photoshopping it out. And I kind of realized it was gone. At first I was like, oh, something's wrong with that picture. I don't know what's going on. I've had that scar for a long time. And I asked her, I said, why did you remove it? And she said, because you look so beautiful. I didn't want it to distract from that. And at that moment, I was like, whoa, just a second. That's me. That's who I am. Better or worse, that's what's made me me. So no one gets to erase that. And I guess that's kind of what pushed me to quit my corporate job. Actually, it was at the same time that I finished the MBA that I stopped working for the company and I moved on to building my own businesses and creating my own networks. And it's these little things that kind of come together, the little emotional impacts that make you go, oh yeah, get over that. Now it's time to move on.
Wow. I think that's
bit of a long way. Sorry, long answer, but
no, a great answer. And I love that something so small and something your friend didn't even realize they were doing all of a sudden had this like really awesome revelation for yourself. So I think that's really amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it looks like we do have one question from an attendee so far. They said, great speech, Raj, very personal and interesting to listen. My question is, which mindset would you consider as important to embrace AI broadly?
I recently did a panel actually talking about mindset, and it's so funny because we put these other terms towards with the mindset, like growth mindset or digital mindset or open mindset. And it's all just mindset. Like, I mean, not everybody wants to be challenged in the workplace every day because they value the time at home, or they want to be intellectually challenged, and we have to respect that. So what mindset do we have to take with AI? It's the same as any technology. We just have to be open to learning it, seeing if it's what we want to use, and then deciding if it's the right thing for our strategy. I think what we see, I'm going to get a bit businessy, but what we see a lot in corporations is that they'll implement technology before they've even thought about if it's actually solving the problem that they're trying to solve. Like, oh, there's new AI. VR was really big for a while, a few years ago, and everybody wanted VR glasses. And it was like, but why? Like, is it useful for what you're doing right now? So I think that mindset is always a bit of a misnomer in terms of as long as you've got people who are motivated, who feel that they have purpose and understand the purpose of your organization, then the technology and AI is almost irrelevant. It'll just happen on its own and you'll apply it where it needs to be applied. And one thing that really stood out to me, I was on Twitter the other day, and I like it as a news source. And, this whole concept of purpose is really important. And it's not just important to millennials. It's just that we now have technology where we can actually have more impact. I think it's important to everybody. And I saw that, I don't know if you guys know the Seattle Gravity Payments, with the CEO who took a pay cut from 1.1 million to 70,000, the same as all his employees. It's the fair wage that he implemented for all his employees, and he reduced his wage to get there. And then on the flip side, Harley Davidson, the CEO, laid off 650 people and increased his own salary to 9.4 million. And then you look at that and you go, okay, so that's that mindset, that I'm in it for myself. And then the other mindset is, hey, we want to have a social impact and we want to make sure people have a living wage. So I think mindset's really based on values and purpose, and everybody has their own view on that, and you kind of have to implement it where you can. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have one other question from Annette. Such a motivating speech. Thank you for sharing your story. I would be interested in the empowering of employees. What do you see as crucial, and how can technology help?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few different pieces there where, I mean, people now have such a short attention span, right? They learn in micro learning almost. Like, you watch YouTube. I don't even watch a YouTube video telling me how to do something unless it's 5 minutes or less. Like, we just have so much more content and so much less attention in our learning, that I think that our learning and development teams within organizations haven't caught up. So I think there's some crazy statistic, and I won't try to make it up right now, but there's a crazy statistic on how much we forget within 30 days that we're taught in a learning and developmental class setting. And you guys would know, you're actually students right now. Remember it for your exams though. But I think that we're just not catching up. And motivation analysis is something that's sadly lacking in a lot of organizations where, as an example, I switched jobs every 2 years within an organization. I just got bored. And so I switched because I'm like, oh, I've learned everything there. Now I'm going to switch to another role within the same organization. If somebody had realized that and was able to leverage that intellectual curiosity in a different way, in a different role, in the right environment, then we're going to suddenly see an exponential upturn in employee engagement, right? So it's really figuring out who is that person and how do I motivate them. And often in corporations, we kind of have this one size fits all attitude, right? It's like we'll give everyone an open workspace. I'm an introvert. I hate open workspaces. I cannot work with 1 million people talking around me. It just doesn't work, right? But everybody was implementing that because they thought, it leverages innovation and ideation, and not always. It depends on the employee. So this individualization and understanding that this has to occur. I mean, kind of like AI. We don't all get the same Netflix algorithm. We don't get all the same recommendations. We get what we actually need to make us watch Netflix, right? Not always a positive thing, but you get where I'm going with that. So I think it's the same thing. We have to acknowledge that AI has figured out this customization, but we still don't do it ourselves in employee engagement. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I'm HR major at UWM, and I work in like the consulting field. So everything you're saying is just like my cup of tea. I love it so much.
Awesome. So you're going to change the world. You're going to change the way that learning and development happens.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So we have another question. Great talk, Raj. When it comes to digital twins for health purposes, would you not be concerned about privacy or data protection issues?
I reckon that if done right, like, I don't know everything you watch in Netflix, but it's influenced the way I'm recommended something in Netflix, right? Because it's developing the AI in the background. And the imaging that I did the research on, this one for the optical imaging, that was based on just this non-user data. It was just images, the images you clicked on. So I think there is a way to distinguish that, hey, we can do a split here and say, we can look at all files. And granted, this means every single clinic in the world would have to agree to it, which is why we don't move this fast forward in healthcare as we do in movie recommendations. But if we were able to take it and erase all user data, then that would be really interesting. I mean, we need some elements. We need to know that Indian people may suffer from less vitamin D in their blood than, you know, somebody living in Denmark or something. Like, we don't know what would be the distinguishing factors or the DNA factors, right? But knowing who you are, like, I don't need to know your medical background to know that you've influenced me getting a digital twin that works, right? I just need to know that they took all the data that was underlying and figured it out. So yes, of course, privacy is an issue, but that's also one of the points from my talk, is that if we don't understand it, then we're already giving away that privacy and giving away that security, because we don't even know how our data is being used now. Like, when I go to click off cookies on a website, I think it was Forbes, somebody sent me an article and I didn't read it because there were over 50 advertisers that I would have had to click off their cookies to be able to read that to read that article. Then you're like, well, so we clearly didn't know that that's where all of our data was going. And now EU has made it a recommendation that they have to show it, right? It's part of the regulations that you have to show it. I wouldn't have known that. So I think we already kind of give away our privacy a lot more than we think. So it's better that we understand and then have an impact on how it's being used.
Absolutely.
My personal opinion.
I'm not seeing any more questions from our audience, but do you want to sort of just leave us with a final message, Raj? Tell us just final thoughts, where we can find some of your other work.
Yeah, I think you were going to share links with the course, and they're on your website. So thank you so much for doing such a great job with promoting everything. I think the main takeaway is the one that often my coachees also don't like, is this, that everything we do is a choice. Our attitudes, what we do every day, it's all a choice. And we get to choose whether we want to react to adversity by building a strength or letting it bring us down. And I guess that's the piece that I would be most diligent in driving forward, is remember, you get to choose. We get to choose where we give our data. We get to choose which AI we want to develop. We get to have that choice. So that's the only thing I'd leave it with. And that means we have a great power. And with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man would say. So
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for being here today.